on Fox Chicago News.
First, the world is watching as violent protests consume the streets of one of America's closest allies. Good evening, I'm Bob Surratt. Robin Robinson is off tonight. Tonight there is looting in the streets of Cairo as anti-government protests continue into the early morning there. Here's the latest. President Hosni Mubarak tonight says he has asked his cabinet to resign. Protesters have taken to the streets in cities like Cairo demanding social and economic reforms. Many protests were organized through text messages and social networking sites. That has caused the government to cut access to most communication networks. Reports suggest as many as 27 people were killed in protests today. Mubarak defended the crackdown, but President Obama tonight urged both protesters and the government to find a non-violent solution to the crisis.
I also call upon the Egyptian government to reverse the actions that they've taken to interfere with access to the internet, to cell phone service, and to social networks that do so much to connect people in the 21st century. At the same time, those protesting in the streets have a responsibility to express themselves peacefully.
Here's why President Obama is so concerned and why many people say you should be concerned too. First of all, Egypt gets $1.3 billion in American aid every year. That's money many Egyptians see as propping up a government that's oppressive and opposed to democracy. If President Mubarak loses power, some experts suggest the leaders who take his place may take a more aggressive stand toward the U.S. and potentially toward our ally Israel. Craig Wall joins us live tonight from outside the Egyptian consulate. Egyptians here naturally are watching this all very closely. Craig?
Bob, they are indeed, and in fact there is a protest planned outside the consulate for tomorrow afternoon. Now, earlier today I talked to a man who is in Egypt now on a vacation that he planned specifically so that he could be there and be in the midst of everything that is going on there now.
It was a scene of jubilation, yet chaos.
Ahmed Rehab is right in the thick of the chaos in Cairo by his own choice. The executive director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations in Chicago arrived there 3 days before the protests began.
I planned it to be here so that I could participate heart and soul, body and mind with the people during these times.
Have you felt in danger yourself personally since you've been over there?
Certainly, especially in the protests. I mean, the scenes in the protests, we're talking about huge amounts of people walking in narrow areas, sometimes bridges, streets, alleys, and we're faced with armored vehicles and armored police battalions that are lunging, tear gas canisters at us like rain.
Rehab was blogging about his experience until the Egyptian government shut down access to the internet. He then tried to stay in contact with his colleagues back in Chicago via cell phone, but the government shut that down too. He was able to call in on a landline and dictate an update.
Being in the front lines, we have to push back on the crowds to take cover at a gas station.
Co-workers watch the scene unfolding in Egypt, but feel at peace with Rehab being there.
Although he's come close to being hit by tear gas and rubber bullets, I'm not too worried about him. I know he's throwing himself into the thick of things, but he should be okay. He really is dedicated to the cause and loves what he's doing.
Rehab told me from Egypt that he believes, or at least he hopes, that in the days ahead, perhaps weeks, the protests will get so strong that President Mubarak has to step down or will be forced from power. Meanwhile, tomorrow, hundreds, perhaps as many as 1,000 people, according to one organizer that I spoke to earlier today, could gather here outside the consulate to rally and protest the situation going on in Egypt. Back to you in the studio.
Craig Wall on Michigan Avenue tonight. Thanks. So the bottom line this evening, Egyptian President Mubarak says he will announce the country's new government tomorrow. Wire services have reported as many as 27 deaths in protests in several cities, including Cairo. And as Craig mentioned, demonstrators will gather outside the Egyptian consulate here in Chicago tomorrow to call for democracy in the country. We will have coverage over the weekend on myfoxchicago.com.